radical left has taken over the Democratic Party.
Hello and welcome to Think Progressively, covering politics and all the other chaos life has to offer. This is episode 33, recorded on Friday, April 16th from Milwaukee. I'm Joe.
And I'm Jason.
And on today's episode, we'll talk about Biden's infrastructure proposal, the American Jobs Plan. But first, the headlines.
The fact is that everything he's saying so far is simply a lie. I'm not here to call out his lies. Everybody knows he's a liar.
First up in headlines, we have a lighthearted story out of Indianapolis. It's another mass shooting. 8 workers were killed, and the shooter also killed themselves at a FedEx shipping facility at the Indianapolis airport. Don't have much to go on. We do know that the shooter was a male, big surprise there, in his 20s, and likely used an AR-style rifle, according to one of the eyewitnesses.
Sticking to form, at least.
We should take guns away from all men. Statistically speaking, I think that would curb most of the gun violence in the country.
I mean, you're not wrong. But again, I think this just goes to show that we just won't do anything about mass gun violence in this country.
Stop using this tragedy as a way to push your political agenda, Joe.
Oh, I hate that saying. I hate it so freaking much. The whole point of politics and resolving issues is to actually address the problem at hand. When you say that you're just utilizing or capitalizing on a crisis or whatever it may be, that's the whole freaking point.
If we can't pass any legislation or have any meaningful conversation,
then what are we doing
about mass shootings right after a mass shooting? We would never be able to talk about it in this country because there's a mass shooting multiple times every week.
And polls even show that after mass shootings or the months after mass shootings, people want gun legislation. The approval rating for gun legislation is very high. But like every single time it dips after like 3 months and no one cares anymore because we're so numb to it at this point.
And there's not a good argument for everyone having as many guns as they can possibly get. You see it in other countries, right? The argument is always, well, if everyone at that FedEx facility had been armed, they would have just shot the guy right away and we wouldn't have had a problem. And the solution to gun violence is more guns, which we have more guns than any other country.
I say we have more guns than people in this country.
And it doesn't solve anything. And other countries where they've drastically limited firearms, it severely curtails gun violence. So that's all of the evidence that you need. It's been ongoing for years now, and we still just, pretend that, they're all wrong. It's solutions more guns, not less guns. Because the Second Amendment, which is talking about militias and not private citizens owning firearms, but we'll also pretend that that is wrong. Hopefully the NRA goes bankrupt again. Then maybe we can start having this conversation.
One can only hope. So let's move on to a much lighter topic.
The trained professionals with guns who can't use them properly.
Yep. So Jason, I was editing our script earlier, and you had 2 more police brutality incidents, and I had to switch it to just more police brutality incidents because I didn't know which ones you were talking about.
Yeah, and I noticed that the third one that is now on our list had popped up since I basically started writing it.
So which 2 were you referring to in the script?
I was referring to Daunte Wright and the Army lieutenant.
And that's what I thought too. And of course, after that, we had another police shooting of an unarmed teenager. So let's go through these because why not?
So during the ongoing trial for a police officer murdering an unarmed black man in Minneapolis, in a suburb of Minneapolis, Daunte Wright was pulled over by police and was legitimately resisting arrest.
Mm-hmm.
No arguments there. Tried to get back into his car.
Yep.
One of the officers yelled that she was going to tase him and then proceeded to shoot him to death.
She mistakenly pulled out her gun instead of her taser.
Which is not that rare of an incident, actually. It's happened almost 24 times.
Which is insane to even think about. And there's been a lot of controversy and talk about this on the internet already. People have tried to explain how insane this excuse is. for a mistake. And let's be real here too. It could very well be a mistake, but this is like a God level mistake here. And because someone died, she needs to pay the consequences for that mistake. So I'm even willing to like give her the benefit of maybe you did somehow miraculously mistake a 5-pound loaded Beretta with a freaking plastic taser.
And I think clearly she did. But again, with all of the training that they have and their constant wariness of everyone's out to kill me all the time, that's what their training says. I think muscle memory took over, and she's more used to drawing the gun, or at least practicing drawing the gun, than she is the taser. And I think that's what happened. It kind of took over, and she didn't think about it for a second, because she said she was going to tase him, and then as soon as she shot him, she realized her mistake and said, uh-oh, I just shot him. So I do think it's a legitimate mistake. But yeah, that's, as a police officer, you have a huge responsibility that we invest in police as a society. We give them that responsibility of, you are going to have a deadly weapon. You are going to be able to use that in the course of your duty. You have a huge responsibility to use it properly. And when you don't, yes, there are going to be some severe consequences because, as we see in this case, you can kill someone.
And this isn't just some random police officer either. She was the head of her police union. She was given the ability to train other officers, and she still did this.
And she has since resigned, which I'm sure that means she still gets like her pension and probably is still being paid while she's being charged with, I believe it's manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah, I think
like
second-degree manslaughter.
Yeah.
So let's go on to the second one. Yeah. Now, this one actually isn't that recent. This is actually back from December, but footage of Second Lieutenant Caron Nazario being abused and pepper sprayed by officers back in December was released recently, sparking national outrage, which, yeah, pissed me off too.
And I don't like that a lot of the conversation centers around why would they do that to an army officer instead of just why would they do that to anyone?
Right, I totally agree. But I think, and that's just them trying to point out the hypocrisy of the right. And it's a shallow argument at the end of the day, correct?
Yeah, it's great. If you're in the military, that's wonderful. Most of my family was in the military. My dad, all of my uncles, I come from a long line of people that have at least served briefly in the military, but I don't think that makes you any more worthy of respect by anyone, and including the police. So
I agree.
Don't feel like the police should treat anyone this way, and I don't like that the conversation about this incident seems to center around the fact that he was an in-uniform Army officer.
Well, let's talk about what happened. So Nazario was being pulled over due to a lack of plates on the backside of his vehicle. However, footage does show that he actually had temporary plates posted in his rear window. Because Nazario was worried about not being in a well-lit area, he proceeded to drive about a mile to a well-lit gas station. And then with heavily tinted windows, the officers considered this a high-risk traffic stop because they did not know what Nazario was doing, and he was not listening to commands. Great start.
Which you would think would actually put them more at ease as well, because he pulled into a well-lit public space.
Well, let's be real here. He didn't speed away to go into a well.
He put his flashers on.
Right. He put his hazards on, and he drove right in front of the police officers in a calm fashion, which is, again, what we tell people to do. If you don't feel safe and comfortable, you are instructed to go to a well-lit area. After Nazario stopped at the gas station, both officers jumped out of the car with guns drawn, yelling at Nazario to get out. After Nazario said he was concerned for his safety, one of the officers said, quote, "Yeah, you better be."
Which is not how the police should address any person that they are dealing with.
And it gets better. Then when Nazario asked repeatedly, "What's going on?" one of the officers responded, "What's going on? You're fixing to ride the lightning."
Very professional.
What is that?
And these are both Officer Gutierrez. Who,
yes.
Then, just to be clear, because the other officer was actually not disciplined at all, and he seemed to be the younger of the two, probably the junior officer that was just kind of backing up.
Mm-hmm. So then Officer Gutierrez proceeded to attempt to force Nazario's door open, ultimately pepper spraying him. Nazario eventually gets out of the car and is immediately tackled and put into handcuffs.
And his hands are out the window. Like, they can see both of his hands. He doesn't have anything. He's not armed.
He doesn't move.
He can't do anything to them while they're pepper spraying him, or while Officer Gutierrez is pepper spraying
And
him.
his window is completely down the entire time as well. So when I say Gutierrez is actually trying to force the door, he's literally reaching his hand into the car, trying to unlock the car door while Nazario's hands are outside the car, trying to force the car door open to get him out.
So clearly not a threat in that situation. Like, there's no excuse that they feared that he had a gun, anything like that. They could see both of his hands. I don't know what they would have been in fear of their own safety for.
And even when Gutierrez put out the pepper spray, you even hear Nazario in a very calm tone saying, please don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do it. And he's just sitting there very calm, just saying, just don't shoot me with pepper spray, please. And he shoots him anyway. And he just responds with, and you're going to have to bleep this, and I apologize, but he just goes, oh, that's fucked up. It just sits there. His hands are still outside the car, completely composed. I give this guy so much credit for how he handled himself in this interaction, and just goes out and says, that's really fucked up, man. That's really fucked up. Since then, Nazario has filed a $1 million lawsuit against the officers, and Officer Gutierrez has been fired, which both good.
And of course, no charges filed against Officer Gutierrez. If anyone else were to do that, that's definitely assault.
Yep.
But if it's a police officer, well, you might lose your job.
So those were the two that Jason was talking about. But since that, we have Adam Toledo in Chicago, Illinois. He's 13 years old. Toledo, who supposedly had a gun, was being chased by the cops and was told to put his hands up. He then turned around with his hands in the air, body cam footage showing that his hands were empty, and the officer immediately shot him and killed Toledo.
13-year-old child.
Yep. And here's the thing. He could have had a gun, and I think they found a gun near him after he was shot. He didn't have it on him at the time when he told him to turn around, and he did comply. Like, what is he supposed to do then at that point? Because when you look at the video footage, he literally is telling Toledo to turn around. He turns around, his hands are up in the air, and there's nothing in his hands. And within a second, he shoots him. And Jason, I included the statement from the officer's attorney because I just want to hear your response to this.
Sure.
So, quote, from the officer's attorney, the juvenile offender had the gun in his right hand, looked at the officer, which could be interpreted as attempting to acquire a target, and began to turn to face the officer, attempting to swing the gun in his direction. At this point, the officer was faced with a life-threatening and deadly force situation. All prior attempts to de-escalate and gain compliance with all of the officer's lawful orders had failed.
All attempts to gain compliance had failed. Well, if he's telling him to turn around and he's turning around, how is that failing to gain compliance?
Well, exactly. He literally told him to turn around, and he did. So are you really saying that because he was following the orders, he should have gotten shot because we didn't know if he was actually going to shoot him or not, even though there wasn't a gun in his hand? This is the crap cops get away with all the time. I'm so sick of this.
Again, this is somebody who might get fired, but I doubt charges would ever be filed. I don't believe it would even get past the grand jury phase.
I don't think so either.
And as we've mentioned before, because the DA, the people that have to present this case, they're co-workers with the police. So why would they try to present a solid case against a police officer when it's against their best interest to do so? All it's going to do is hinder their relationship. And that's why police-related incidents need to be prosecuted by an independent party and not a part of the same justice system that the police are in. You're never going to get an unbiased investigation.
I don't know how we get away from this. The officer was facing a life or death situation and he just made a call. I don't know what we can even do when that's their defense every time and we can't prove it that's not the case. You know, because at least in Toledo's case,
he didn't turn his body camera off.
Right.
Which usually is what happens.
And that's still not going to do anything. We saw that he turned around, he complied with the officer's orders. He did not have a gun in his hand when he was shot, and it doesn't matter. The cop can still say he faced a life or death situation. Then what do we do? It's freaking tragic, man.
The only reason we hear about it more now is just because everyone has cameras. Because this happens so often, we petitioned for body cameras for police officers. So now we're starting to get that footage. Everyone has a cell phone. It's not like this is new.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't happening for the past 100 years. It's just that we now have footage. Like we talked about the last one with the Officer Gutierrez and Lieutenant Nazario, that was not news until that footage came out.
Correct.
It's the video that pushes these stories, and that's why you don't really hear about it when there's no footage.
And here's the thing, though. Even though Nazario did everything correct in that situation, by the way, because I think if he did move, if he did get out of the car, there was a high chance that he could have gotten shot with how agitated those officers were, especially Gutierrez. So in my opinion, he did everything correct. He stayed cool. He kept his composure. He obeyed as far as he could until he thought his own safety was in question. And that's perfect. And even then, the right still tries to demonize him as some kind of troublemaker trying to pick a fight with cops.
I don't have an answer for that because that's what they say. Well, if they had only listened and done what the officer said, and then you have situations where they do listen and do what the officer says, and it ends the same way.
I honestly believe if Nazario tried to do what the officer said and put his hands down to open his car door, they would have seen him as a threat. I do not know how that wouldn't be the case. If he got out of the car, I could see them thinking that he may be trying to charge or maybe running, so they would just shoot him. So the fact that he didn't do anything was probably the safest thing for him to actually do. God. So Jason, you got some updates on COVID for us.
Yeah. Moving on to COVID updates. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine distribution has been paused after 6 women who recently had the vaccine developed a rare form of blood clot. This is the same type of blood clot that has caused issues for the AstraZeneca vaccine in Europe.
Fun fact, Hillary Clinton got it in 2012. I found that all on my own.
And as we were looking up and finding that story, it seems that the numbers for that type of blood clot are actually pretty high. I saw a study in 2016, so before any of the COVID stuff, that said approximately 2 to 5 million people
Per year, right?
per year suffer those types of blood clots, and they thought that number might actually be low. So this is a situation where, working under the utmost caution, the CDC decided to pause the Johnson & Johnson vaccine rollout. That does not mean there's any causative relationship yet. We just know that 6 women who recently had the vaccine have developed a blood clot. I believe one of them died. It can be serious. It's in your brain. But that doesn't mean that the reason they got the blood clot was from the vaccine. So if you had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, I wouldn't personally freak out about it. Yes, if you develop headaches, abdominal pain, things like that, definitely go see a doctor immediately. But let's just say,
to really worry about.
We'll see. They'll figure people that know what they're doing a lot better than me will get to the bottom.
Well, and a lot of this also is to just train physicians on how to properly treat the blood clot itself. That's the other big thing with this pause as well. Just in case if it does happen, the physicians know how to actually treat it properly as opposed to other blood clots. So let me ask you a question, though. Do you think this was the right move, I don't want to say politically, to pause the vaccine?
I don't think it should matter, personally.
Well, I didn't say that what it should be. I'm saying, what do you think it will be?
I really don't think it will. I think people that are going to use this as some sort of confirmation of their already fear of the vaccine, it's just that. It's people that have already made up their mind. Big pharma is out to get them, and this is all a big hoax, and vaccines are evil. And we'll kind of talk about some of them in a minute. But I don't think anyone who is legitimately looking into it or cares about what is the actual truth of this, it really, it shouldn't take you very long to find out that just what we said, that that's just 6 people, and it's based on a very large rollout, and the number of people with these blood clots, regardless of vaccinations, is pretty high anyway. So statistically speaking, I don't think this is anything out of the ordinary. But yes, it's the right thing. You can't think politically if you're the CDC. You don't care what the public reaction is going to be to pausing it. If that's what your data is telling you to do to be safe, is to pause it and get to the bottom of it first, then that's what you do. Because that's what science is, not political. So you can't care if you're the person making that decision that, this might heighten people's fears of the vaccine. That can't matter. That can't factor into it. So I do think they did the right thing by pausing it. And I don't think, maybe I'm being too optimistic, but I don't think that this will color people's perceptions if they are not already kind of an anti-vaxxer to begin with, in which case it wouldn't matter to them. They're always going to say it's mark of the beast, Bill Gates tracking you, some whatever
All that
nonsense.
fun stuff. My first thought was immediately to go to the Bob Woodward story back with Trump, where we had all these interviews with Trump saying that he intentionally downplayed it so people wouldn't be afraid. So basically, he did one of those two options, and he chose the latter option to just kind of let it go away and then just pretend it didn't exist so people wouldn't be afraid of what's going on. And we saw how that turned out. So I completely agree with you. I think we had to, even if it doesn't look good, take care of it now before it gets really bad later. That's the responsible thing to do.
But I like Trump because he's not a politician, and he just said that he behaved politically and not in the best interest of the people. And why do vaccines matter, you might say, right now? COVID's over, right?
Yes.
Well, not in Michigan, it sure isn't.
Oh, okay.
Really, it's not across the entire world, but specifically in Michigan. Michigan has been leading the nation in new coronavirus cases per population for the past 2 weeks, and infection numbers have been climbing for 7 weeks. They are actually at higher infection rates now than they ever were since coronavirus.
What the heck is going
happened.
on over there?
Yeah. They are going slightly down over the last couple days. The number of adults hospitalized with COVID-19 reached a record high of 4,011 on Tuesday, but the tally has plummeted to the low number now of 3,960 as of yesterday.
Oh my God.
So it's hopefully plateauing and it'll come back down, but things are not good there.
What the heck is going on?
Governor Gretchen Whitmer has said that the surge is driven by rapidly spreading variants of the disease, youth sports, and people who no longer follow safety precautions, including wearing masks, avoiding large gatherings, and not maintaining social distance. She has taken some criticism for not pushing for a return to the more strict mandates, but that's kind of understandable, seeing as how they had armed protests at the state capitol, and she was almost kidnapped when they pushed for that to keep everyone safe the first time. I would have actually just come out with a memo stating that you know that COVID's a thing. If you've been alive for the past year, you know it's a thing. You know it's dangerous. You know it's killing people. You know you can get severely ill. That I would be just done. Particularly Gretchen Whitmer cannot be blamed for just being done with all of this nonsense and just letting people do whatever they're going to do because they're going to do it anyway. And the real problem here, and what we're seeing, she specifically said variants of the disease and youth sports because these new strains are starting to affect younger people. Remember when months ago it was only if you're over 60 this is an issue. Now people 10 to 29 are 30% of the state's total confirmed COVID cases, according to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Do we know how Michigan ranks as far as vaccinations go?
They're actually fairly high. I know they were saying that they need more vaccine. That's what the governor was pushing for, to get more vaccines. But I also saw a quote from one of the people in one of the larger, I don't have it in front of me, but it was a doctor from one of the larger hospitals there saying they've got plenty of vaccines. Most of their vaccines are going unused. That's not the issue. They need people to actually get vaccinated, and they need people to behave responsibly, which is the real issue. Because, there's this thought out there that says COVID's over now. We've got vaccines. People are getting the vaccines. Everything can go back to normal.
Well, and I don't know if you saw this, Jason, but there was a recent exchange between Tom Cotton and Tony Fauci. Did you see that?
Quick side note, right after recording this episode, we did realize that it was Jim Jordan and not Tom Cotton. So every time we say Tom Cotton, just imagine we're saying Jim Jordan. Feel free to still email and tweet to let Joe know that he was wrong, though. Back to the show. I did not, but knowing Tom Cotton, I can imagine.
where he literally was yelling at Dr. Fauci saying, or asking, when are we going to get our freedoms back? When are we going to get our liberties back? I mean, our free speech has been violated. Our freedom of religion has been violated. So, Dr. Fauci, when are we going to get our freedoms back? I want to know. I want an exact number of when we're going to get our freedoms back. And
as if that's somehow under his control.
But this is the exact problem where you have our leaders who are literally saying, I just want to go back to normal. I don't care what's going to happen. And it leads to stuff like this. It leads to people not caring. And we have more surges of COVID-19 instead of actually getting over this.
And it leads to our next COVID update.
Oh, no. What is this? I don't even know what this is.
In Fort Lauderdale,
Of
Florida,
course it is.
they had the Million Maskless March,
Oh, my God.
which it's, of course, a white guy who's promoting this, and they have to take the whole Million Man March approach. So, in Fort Lauderdale, hundreds, not exactly a million, of people gathered for a protest against mask mandates and a mask burning.
Oh, great.
This was hosted by Chris Nelson, a crackpot who is also known as the Target Guy, thanks to a viral video from September of last year where a group of people, many in patriotic attire or MAGA gear, went maskless through a Target store, singing "We're Not Going to Take It"
I remember
by
this.
Twisted Sister. Yes, the infuriating Target
Yeah.
video from last year. This is the same guy.
Great.
Along with anti-mask signs, Nelson encouraged marchgoers to bring with them any signs that show disdain for forced vaccinations or the experimental vaccine he says are being pushed strongly by the Broward County government. So not only are they against masks and any kind of responsible behavior, they are also against the vaccine. So pretty much this is a death cult.
So a Trump rally.
I watched the video, and it did look very much like a Trump rally. There were a bunch of Trump flags.
Of course there were.
These are definitely his people. I'm sure there was a healthy contingent of QAnon people in the crowd. They were spreading the same nonsense.
Was there any trace of Antifa actually being there?
I did not see any violent Antifa riots going on.
That'd be kind of crazy, like 4D chess, just people just randomly showing up in Trump gear, just being like super stupid and anti-vax, but not actually being violent. 4D chess Antifa, the secret conspiracy.
But I saw people talking about how the masks make you eat your own CO2 emissions and cause you all sorts of medical problems. And I wear a mask every time I go in public. I should be dead, I think.
I was just saying, you
according
should
to
be
these
dead by now then,
people.
right?
Yeah, no ill effects.
I work out with a mask on. I should really be dead by now.
Mm-hmm. All that germs and CO2
Yeah.
that you're breathing back in.
And I've been seeing even on right-wing Twitter as well, no talk about actually getting vaccines. It's all about how the supposed vaccine passports are going to be an infringement on our freedom.
I did see some no vaccine passports.
I'm sure, because that's their big rallying cry right now. It's not about actually doing better for the entire country, which, by the way, I'm going to circle back to that stupid Dr. Fauci video where Fauci had to literally explain to him, it's not about getting our liberties back or taking our liberties away. It's about actually caring for our fellow Americans.
It's about being safe.
Right. It's about not being selfish.
When are we going to get our freedoms back? One, I don't think putting a mask on is an impingement of your freedoms. But when are you going to be able to safely be in public without a mask on? When the virus is gone.
Freaking moron.
It's a very simple answer.
Uh,
And how do we get the virus to go away? For you to wear a mask in public. That's all you have to do. We just have to take it seriously. We were almost there.
well, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. The right has constantly tried everything in their power not to only impede progress, but to move us backwards. That's the real issue here, where if the people who are all about individual freedom and liberty actually thought that they could trust the public, they would be the first ones in line to do this stuff. And at every single step of the way, they are holding us back.
Apparently, pro-life also includes the coronavirus. Because they don't seem to want to do anything
Like
to
life-
kill that.
Like life of the virus, not
Not people.
not
but-
people who have the
Well,
virus.
just like pro-life doesn't
Actually,
matter after
right.
you're born. So I feel like it's fetuses and the coronavirus. That's what pro-life means.
God, I hate these people.
And this is why we have to have things like mask mandates. Because there is a segment of the population that, look, we know it's not 1918 with the Spanish flu when we didn't know for sure how to combat it and modern medical science was in its infancy. We have the internet. Everyone in 2 minutes, if they want to, can find legitimate science by reputable sources, giving them all of the information they could possibly want about why masks are effective, how to keep themselves safe, what the current infection rates in their area are. Every piece of information you could possibly want at your fingertips. And these idiots are burning masks in a barrel and shouting about how the mask mandates
The government's
are
going to
tyranny.
take you.
It's ridiculous. Like, that's the reason why you can't just say, hey, everybody, just wear a mask. We'll all be safe. And we don't have to have laws and enforcement because you're not stupid. No, they are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, like, that's the reason why. Because of you idiots.
And let's also be clear, too. It's not just this weird, small sect of people, right, that no one knows or cares about.
It's the majority of conservatives.
It's your aunt. It's your uncles. It's your crazy cousins. Your crazy friends from college or whoever. They're people that you know. I'm sure every one of our listeners right now knows at least one or two people who are crazy enough to believe this stuff and have acted that way.
We know people who were perfectly reasonable people who worked in the medical industry. The only difference is that they're super conservative, apparently, and they're anti-maskers and anti-vaccinators now. Like, what is wrong with conservatism that it's leading to this? I don't even understand. Like, I never thought, well, yeah, I don't believe in small government because I feel like that's just trying to lower taxes for the rich and, screw everybody else. And I don't believe that corporations are more important than people. So yeah, I disagree on those grounds with conservatives. That's fine. They are lunatics ever since Trump came around. I don't understand what happened to make them all like a bunch of crazy, rabid, anti-science conspiracy theorists, but that's what they are these days.
It's just an overall hatred of Democrats and anyone who knows what they're talking about. That's all it is. The only point of what conservatism is today is to pwn the other side. That's it.
Don't listen to those elites and their knowledge.
Well, and that's literally what's happening. And I'll go back again to that Dr. Fauci and Tom Cotton video where Tom Cotton, in his complete lack of freaking wisdom on any freaking subject, tries to argue with Anthony Fauci and not let him get a word in edgewise only because he's a government official and a doctor. That's it. And he tries to act like he knows more than a goddamn epidemiologist. We're so close. We are so close to getting done with this. Stop ruining it for us.
And we need to reach like 70%, 75% vaccination rates. Start hitting the good version of herd immunity instead of the one where everyone dies.
Well, and on top of that, we're going to start needing boosters relatively soon, too.
Potentially.
Yeah. Oh, Pfizer just came out today saying that they're going to need an annual booster shot. If there's this much contention now for the first couple of doses, or first dose if you're a J&J vaccine, imagine having to do this every freaking year.
You hear people all the time that don't want to get flu shots annually. They think somehow it will make you sick. And I blame Jenny McCarthy.
I blame so many people, man. She's one of them.
Yeah. Well, let's move on.
All right. So in all of this chaos, many of you may be asking, what's Biden been up to? Actually, quite a lot. Recently, after the latest mass shootings, not even the ones that we talked about earlier today.
So the not as late as the most latest ones, but still the recent ones that were not the newest ones.
Yes. In response to those, Biden signed several executive orders targeting ghost guns and red flag laws for some new gun control measures, which, okay. Now, let's be real here. Most gun control measures will have to be done through actually Congress, so Biden can't really do much through executive order on its own. So let's temper our expectations for these from the get-go.
Also, this will not pass. So temper that expectation.
Right. So let's talk about these orders. According to the article, Biden directed the DOJ to write rules that will reduce the proliferation of, quote, ghost guns. or homemade firearms often made from parts bought online and that do not have traceable serial numbers. Biden said he wants kits and parts used to make guns to be treated as firearms themselves, where the parts have serial numbers and are subject to a background check. Which,
Yay, useless law.
yeah, not going to do much.
How many of the mass shootings were done by
A
these
3D
ghost
printed
guns?
gun?
Oh, none? Okay, they have way to solve the problem, Biden.
Mm-hmm. So, a good start. Biden also sought to reduce access to stabilizing braces, which can effectively turn a pistol into a more lethal rifle while not being subject to the same regulations that a rifle of similar size would be. Again, fine.
So it's just a direct result of the Colorado shooting because that's what the guy in the grocery store used,
Correct.
which almost certainly was just due to the fact that the rifle version of that gun was, for a short amount of time, outlawed in Boulder, but is now perfectly legal anyway. So
Yep.
wouldn't matter anyway. So another useless law.
Thanks to Republicans in the NRA.
Oh, well, you mean the gun manufacturers. They're the ones paying both of those.
Well, that
groups.
too. Then finally, he asked the DOJ to publish, quote, red flag laws for states to use as guides. Red flag laws allow family members or enforcement agencies to petition state courts to temporarily block people from obtaining firearms if they present a danger to themselves or others. And I'm in total agreement for these.
But this is actually reducing access to firearms, so this will never pass.
Correct. But it should be.
It's the only one that would actually do anything out of these three.
I agree. Well, and let's even talk about that too, where, Jason, I know you have guns, right? If I literally thought you were going to hurt yourself or your wife or anyone else, I would want to be able to step in as your friend and say, we need to take these guns away.
Hold on now, Joe. There's this thing called the Second Amendment, and it says
You have the right
guns,
to kill
guns,
yourself.
guns,
Yeah.
guns.
I have
guns.
the right to kill my wife if I want to.
Yeehaw. I believe that is the full text.
Might as well be. So this really doesn't do too much. It's mostly for show. But I mean, it's something, I guess. I don't know.
Thanks,
Thanks, Biden.
Oh, Biden.
It's something a little bit cooler. Biden vows to pull U.S. troops from Afghanistan, ending the, quote, forever war. Yay! According to the article, his plan to pull out American forces, numbering 2,500 now, by this September 11th, the anniversary of the attacks, which were coordinated from Afghanistan. Soon after Biden made his announcement, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg in Brussels said the alliance had agreed to withdraw its roughly 7,000 forces from Afghanistan, matching Biden's decision to begin a final pullout by May 1st. Biden said, quote, I am now the fourth United States president to preside over an American troop presence in Afghanistan. 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I will not pass this responsibility to a fifth.
If it ever actually happens, I believe this is a good decision. I think I've heard from at least the last 2 presidents that they were going to end the troop presence in Afghanistan.
I heard that a lot from Trump.
And we're still waiting. Yeah, for Trump, it actually went up for 3 of the 4 years
Yep.
of his term. And just in case anyone needed to be reminded, and I mentioned this when we were talking about the second impeachment and the fallout from the Capitol riots, when everyone was talking about Liz Cheney and what Liz Cheney has to say. And let's listen to Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney is one of the good conservatives.
What does Liz Cheney have to say?
Says,
I wanna know what Liz Cheney says.
reminds us all that we should stop elevating conservative voices when they happen to agree with us, because 90% of the time they're crazy and we shouldn't listen to them 10% of the time. So her quote for this, now keep in mind, her dad was Dick Cheney, who was vice president during the start of this.
I thought you
war.
were just getting who was crazy.
Well, he shot somebody in the face, but well, that's okay. Her quote was, "Wars don't end when one side abandons the fight. Withdrawing our forces from Afghanistan by September 11th will only embolden the very jihadists who attacked our homeland on that day 20 years ago. By declaring that this withdrawal is not based on conditions on the ground, the Biden administration is sending a dangerous signal that the United States fundamentally does not understand or is willfully ignorant of the terrorist threat."
What does she want us to do?
Yeah, oh, the terrorists will win. Ha ha, we've beaten them back. They only occupied our country for 20 years. What a victory. And in case you need a reminder of what the cost of this war has been, in human life, 2,300 U.S. service members have died in Afghanistan since the war began in October of 2001, including 20,666 wounded. Brown University's research in 2019 estimated the loss of life amongst the national military and police in Afghanistan to be more than 64,100. And according to the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, or UNAMA, nearly 111,000 civilians have been killed or injured since it began systematically recording civilian casualties in 2009.
Since only 2009.
Correct.
Great.
When is this ever going to end, if not now? It's been 20 years. There are people signing up for the military that were not alive when the September 11th attacks happened. This is turning into a generational war.
That's completely offensive on our part. That's the other thing we need to realize here, too, is that they're not attacking America. We are in their homeland. For 20 years, people grew up in Afghanistan and lived their entire life so far with troops in it.
So let's stop listening to Liz Cheney, ever, but specifically when it comes to this. Let's stop this war, which it can't even technically be a war, right? Because it wasn't declared by Congress. It's a police action or something, whatever.
For 20 years.
For 20 years. And not to mention the human cost. I mean, I'm sure it's cost trillions of dollars on top of that for all of the conservatives that are so worried about how are we going to pay for all of Biden's plans.
But what about our homeless vets, Jason? What are we going to do about our homeless vets?
We don't have much. Again, it's like the pro-life thing. Once you're born, you're on your own. Once you come back from fighting, you're on your own. And in fact, most of the time, even when you're over there fighting, it's all about the defense contractors.
But it's not even that. It's the fact that Republicans are using vets as an excuse to not pay for things to help our own vets. That's the real problem, where when Democrats try to push things, hey, this would be a great idea if our own nation has health care, maybe for example, and they'll immediately go, well, I don't want to subsidize some terrible poor person. So what about our homeless vets? Or what about all our veterans who aren't getting the assistance at the VA? Oh my God, what are we going to do about all that stuff? But they're totally fine sending them there in the first place, spending trillions of dollars just to get their butts kicked and to come on back wounded with PTSD. So it's not even like the pro-life thing. It'd be like the pro-life thing if they intentionally force them to give birth, which they do, and then use, I don't know, the babies as an excuse to not pay for schools or something.
Which they actually do in some areas, particularly minority areas.
Yeah, now I just depressed myself.
It'd be like if they said that you can't teach people about sex ed, and then also they can't have access to birth control, and then also abortion is bad, but we're not going to do anything to try to stop
and then just
unwanted pregnancy.
Assume that slut shaming is going to be the solution.
We're getting off topic. War is bad, okay?
So are Republicans.
You heard it here first.
Well, just to show you that we are totally fine calling out BS on both sides, let's actually criticize Biden here. At least I'm going to criticize the hell out of Biden for this.
We did just a minute ago, but yeah, that's fine.
Shut up. News released 2 days saying that Biden plans on keeping the U.S. refugee cap at a Trump-era low of 15,000 refugees.
Why do people sneak into this country illegally, Joe? Oh, maybe because it's impossible to enter legally.
Why is he doing this? Well, no, I'll tell you why, because the article says so. According to Reuters, the president's cautious approach appears to have been tied to concerns over the optics of admitting more refugees at a time of rising numbers of migrants arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border in recent months, and not to wanting to look too open or soft, according to a U.S. official with knowledge of the matter told Reuters. Optics?
It's not about what's right or humane. It's about how it makes us look.
Well, okay, let's talk about optics really quick here. I already told you, I think was like last time or 2 times ago, I'm actually doing a study on right-wing Twitter. All they've been talking about this entire time, including recently, has been about how Biden is completely incompetent at handling the border crisis. And they use Biden border crisis all the time and how bad it is. Not once have any of them said, oh, well, I mean, at least they kept the refugees low. I really applaud Biden for that. No, they're still calling it, saying we have open borders everywhere and that Biden's doing a terrible job. So why is he caving to them?
Why indeed?
These aren't even illegal these are refugees, for God's sakes. Oh, God.
Who really will probably end up becoming illegal immigrants because they can't do it the legal way
And they're not going to go home.
and get killed by drug cartels and gangs. Might as well try swimming that river, walking across that desert, whatever you got to do.
This really is turning into like, we hate everything about
Yeah.
this country episode.
Fair.
That's all I got.
Let's move on to our somewhat less negative main story.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it? It's hard to get any word in with this clown.
Let's talk about the American Jobs Plan.
Let's do it. So as we talked about so far, Biden's been pretty darn busy. Good news is, though, Biden's approval rating of his work actually has just recently jumped to 53%, his highest since taking office. He currently has a 39% disapproval rating, and this is compared to Trump at this time with a 39% approval rating and a 48% disapproval rating. Now, why is his approval rating so high? Well, it's because of things like his new infrastructure plan or the American Jobs Plan.
And the COVID plan.
And the
was
COVID plan.
One of the most popular pieces of legislation in probably the last 2 decades.
Or we're not going to talk about that one. We're going to talk about the American Jobs Plan. So the American Jobs Plan is actually the first of 2 infrastructure plans or proposals from the Biden administration. The second one, which is coming relatively soon in the next couple of weeks, is the American Families Plan. And that'll be focused more on the people working within the economy itself. The American Jobs Plan is, well, a more typical infrastructure plan. However, this actually does a great job at pushing at what we consider infrastructure to begin with. For example, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand tweeted, quote, "Paid leave is infrastructure. Childcare is infrastructure. Caregiving is infrastructure." And we'll talk about how Republicans respond to that later on. But that's kind of a main idea with this whole infrastructure proposal. It's to expand the idea of what infrastructure is. Now, I listened to a recent segment on the New York Times where I think I really liked the way this was broken down. And the reporter broke it down like this. Biden's infrastructure plan does 3 main things. 1, it rebuilds our existing infrastructure. 2, it makes America more competitive by investing in future infrastructure to compete more with China and other countries. And 3, it invests in its people. So let's go through each one of those and see how Biden's actually proposing to help fix our country. With rebuilding our existing infrastructure, according to the administration website, quote, "The president's plan will modernize 20,000 miles of highway, roads, and main streets. It will fix the 10 most economically significant bridges in the country in need of reconstruction. It also will repair the worst 10,000 smaller bridges, providing critical linkages to communities. And it will replace thousands of buses and rail cars, repair hundreds of stations, renew airports, and expand existing transit on rail into new communities." Sounds pretty good so far.
Sounds like infrastructure to me.
It does. And you'll see a lot of this is actually note towards transportation infrastructure in particular. One thing that we may not usually think about when we talk about infrastructure, though, is drinking water. So also from the website, Biden's plan will also eliminate all lead pipes and service lines in our drinking water systems, improving the health of our country's children and communities of color. It will put hundreds of thousands of people to work laying thousands of miles of transmission lines and capping hundreds of thousands of orphan oil and gas wells and abandoned mines. And it will bring affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband to every American, including the more than 35% of rural Americans who lack access to broadband at minimally acceptable speeds. That's pretty big.
Yep. Internet is infrastructure in this day and age.
Well, and that's where a lot of the controversy comes from, but I would totally agree. Broadband is definitely infrastructure. We're actually struggling with that in rural Wisconsin right now, where one of the main things that Tony Evers campaigned on was expanding broadband to its more rural communities.
And it's not even that rural before you start losing access to high-speed, reliable internet. You can go really 40 minutes outside of Milwaukee here, and you don't have a reliable carrier because it's not profitable to do so. And that's what I used to work for the cable company here. They're not running lines out to 5 farms on a, you can say rural. I mean, it is rural, but it's not like what you think of, like literally in the middle of nowhere. Like there's one cabin out in the woods.
Right.
And that's what we think. It's not that rural. Really, you don't have to be that far outside of the major cities before no for-profit corporation is going to want to run service lines to you because it's not in their best interest.
Right,
to
it's
do
not
so.
profitable for them.
Yep.
And you may notice a general theme with this infrastructure plan, how Biden really focuses on also helping communities of color through his infrastructure investments. So when we talked about lead pipes, obviously things like Flint, Michigan come to mind, and other communities of color in urban areas that have these horribly run down water systems that need repairing. That's fantastic news. But also the idea of giving more people in communities of color access to more jobs in doing infrastructure building projects. Even on top of that, Biden offers a $20 billion investment for communities that were hurt by highway expansions in recent history.
And there was that story recently where Pete Buttigieg went on Fox News and was talking about how the highway system is racist and is part of systemic racism. And all of the conservative pundits were losing their minds.
Well, they're mocking him for it.
Yeah, they're saying, oh, how stupid, how can highways be racist?
Well, let's talk about that.
We
Literally.
did in the redlining episode.
Well, let's talk about it again in this episode. Quote from the infrastructure plan. Too often, past transportation investments divided communities, like the Claiborne Expressway in New Orleans or the I-81 Expressway in Syracuse. Or it left out the people most in need of affordable transportation options. So the whole point of this plan will reconnect neighborhoods who were cut off by historic investments and ensure that new projects will increase opportunity and advance racial equity and environmental justice and promote affordable access to these systems, which is good. When you talk about places like Syracuse where people's houses were literally getting bulldozed down for a highway to go through it, that led to huge racial disparities in predominantly Black and Hispanic neighborhoods.
They ran highways through those neighborhoods.
Right.
That's what we talked about. How can highways be racist?
This is how.
They were very much racist. It's so obvious if you think about it for 2 minutes and actually look at, well, why are people saying this? But that's not the conservative way. They just hear a statement like highways are racist and they just think it's so hilarious. And they start talking like they know anything about it.
But this is also why it's so good to, even though we have our gripes with Biden, to have a president that will actually address these types of issues. To have a focus on racial disparities in your infrastructure bill is fantastic and something we would have never seen out of the Trump administration again.
They would have had a law that says you can't do that. You can't talk about how anything you're doing is to combat historic racism.
Right. Now, here's the issue with that, though. I'm a bit skeptical about because it doesn't go into too much detail about how they actually plan on reconnecting the neighborhoods. I mean, how do you reconnect the neighborhood when there's a gigantic highway going through it?
And it was a neighborhood 60 years ago.
Right. The plan does say it's going to inspire, quote, basic research to future-proof transportation infrastructure, but, I mean, we'll have to see what actually happens to see what the consequences of that are, or to see if they follow through on any of it. So it's good. I'm glad to hear it. It sounds nice, but until I actually see something happen, I'm going to remain skeptical.
They also could do more. If I have a criticism for this entire bill, and we'll talk about it when we talk about the money, but there's a lot more that could be done if you're using this type of language and you want to accomplish these types of things. It needs to be a bigger bill. You know, like we want to combat systemic racism introduced during redlining. Okay, wonderful, but we need to do a bunch more than what you're proposing if that's what you want to do. And I, again, fear that if this does get passed, which I guess I don't really fear it's going to get passed. I don't think it will, certainly not in this way, but that'll be like, well, see, we solved that systemic racism from redlining. It was in the infrastructure bill. So I do worry about putting that type of language in here and then not really addressing those things will lead to the understanding that, oh, well, we already fixed that. We did that. It was in that bill that we passed. When, as we just said, they're really not doing enough to honestly combat the things that they bring up.
So let's move on to our second point, which is making America competitive. Biden's proposal has $300 billion set for manufacturing and businesses, including $50 billion for semiconductor research and manufacturing, $30 billion for pandemic preparedness, and $52 billion for domestic manufacturers. A big overarching theme of this is made in America, and we are going to produce these things by making them in America and not outsourcing them. So this is why you have a lot of big infrastructure ideas coming to jobs and manufacturing focuses because it's all about giving people jobs and the means of making the things that we want to have, which again is the whole point of an infrastructure bill. That's the idea.
We are still dealing with a huge materials shortage, particularly when we talk about semiconductors, because a lot of this stuff is coming from China.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And during COVID and everything going on, it really disrupted the supply chain. And the fact that we have to wait for things to come from overseas and fight with the rest of the world to try to get...
It's awful.
Well, it just shows that, we don't manufacture things here anymore.
Right.
And that's a problem. And this COVID has kind of exposed that as a vulnerability. What would happen if China got powerful enough to actually place embargoes on the United States? What would we do? We would be really without a lot of things that make our modern lives possible. Again, semiconductor, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
If we could not get chips for computers, what would we do as a country? It would take us quite a long time to
Use an
build
abacus.
that infrastructure up, which this bill is saying, let's do it now.
Use a super abacus. Use 3 abacuses.
We're not very good at that either in this country.
Is it abacuses or abacusi?
Abaci?
Abaci. 3 abaci? I want to know now. But no time. One big thing that I really enjoyed looking at this infrastructure plan was Biden's $174 billion investment in electric vehicles. Now, Biden's goal is to be at net zero emissions by 2050, which is awesome. But how are we going to actually get there? Well, this plan kind of explains it a little bit. So, quote, this plan will enable automakers to spur domestic supply chains from raw materials to parts, retool factories to compete globally, and support American workers to make batteries and electric vehicles. It will give consumers point-of-sale rebates and tax incentives to buy American-made electric vehicles while ensuring that these vehicles are affordable for all families and manufactured by workers with good jobs. Because that's kind of the whole point, right? When we have electric vehicles, they sound great, but they're unaffordable for most Americans. That's why I don't have one.
And one of the biggest issues with electric vehicles, particularly in northern United States that we're in, is the batteries are less reliable, especially in the cold, and they do need to be replaced and are very expensive. So and everybody knows this is no secret, that the big breakthrough that needs to happen for electric vehicles is some sort of improved battery.
Yes.
And whoever figures that out and starts manufacturing that will make a lot of money.
They will
and
win
sell
capitalism.
a lot of vehicles. So why shouldn't it be an American company? I would prefer if the government just owned the
means of
whatever.
production.
Yeah.
You going full commie on me now?
Well, I mean, if we're going to be putting in the investment, why shouldn't I? One thing I have a problem with, again, I'm not all for ending private ownership of business, but if the government is putting in the money to
Research?
do the research to start, then they should get the profit. It shouldn't be, the government spent $1 billion to build this plant and research this technology,
Now this private company gets
GE is, making trillions of dollars from it and pays no taxes. That's one of the problems with modern day capitalism.
Well, let's keep going on these electric vehicles. Continuing on, this plan will also establish grant and incentive programs for state and local governments and the private sector to build a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers by 2030, while promoting strong labor, training, and installation standards, which that's fantastic. Because again, if you're going to have a mass amount of electric vehicles, you need the infrastructure to maintain those electric vehicles.
You don't want people stranded.
The 4 electric vehicle chargers in the back of Myers parking lot isn't going to do it
Oak
for
Creek?
us. Yeah,
I thought of the same place. Yeah. The one area we both know of.
you're right. So they ain't going to do it. We need more. So that's good. What's also great is, according to the plan, it will also replace 50,000 diesel transit vehicles, such as like buses, and electrify at least 20% of our yellow school bus fleet through a new Clean Buses for Kids program at the EPA with the support of the Department of Energy. So our actual public transit system will become electric vehicles.
I like it's for the children
Right.
in there.
That's how you get them, It's always, what about the children? What about the children? And to keep on going, we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but $100 billion will also be spent using for high-speed broadband across the country. And another $100 billion will go towards electric grid and clean energy infrastructure as well. Again, I don't have a problem with any of this. This is good stuff. It's literally going to make our country better.
Make people's lives easier.
And finally, the third point of the infrastructure plan is investing in people. Now, like I said before, there isn't too much that goes on in the American Jobs Plan for this, because a lot of that's going to be in the American Families Plan, but there's a lot that goes into this plan as well. For example, $400 billion will be established for home or community-based care for the elderly and people with disabilities. So long story short, it's meant to pay workers who are working in these elder care facilities, because they don't get paid well at all, and to incentivize more to come in, because we have a gigantic CNA and nursing shortage right now. And usually, in most nursing homes, there is a gigantic ratio between nurses and residents, and they can't keep up with the workload.
And certainly confirm from all of my time spent in a nursing home visiting my father in the past couple of years.
So when we are talking about the vast majority of COVID patients being ravaged because of nursing home care, and as we talked about a lot of this stuff with Andrew Cuomo in New York, this needs to be better invested in. So I'm glad this is in the plan. In addition to that, $213 billion are set aside for affordable housing, $100 billion for school constructions, $12 billion for community colleges, $25 billion for childcare facilities, $18 billion for VA hospitals, $10 billion for federal buildings. So literally, the buildings that keep our cities going.
Buildings aren't infrastructure.
Then what is?
What is infrastructure?
Now, I'm sure the question that you guys all have, because you're very incredibly skeptical and intelligent listeners, is, or you just have some like really stupid conservative uncle who would yell at this at you, how are we going to pay for it? Biden actually has a plan for paying for this, as opposed to simply borrowing the money and running up the deficit. So how's he going to do that? Well, first off, he's going to raise taxes on corporations. Sounds awesome, right? He's going to do that by increasing the corporate tax rate. Now, Trump actually decreased it from 35% to 21%. Biden wants to actually just increase that partially up to 28%, which, come on, man, go up more. Go up to at least 35%.
This was in his initial proposal when he was running for president.
Yeah.
So we kind of already knew this part.
Second, he's going to force multinational companies to pay more in tax to the U.S. in income made around the world. The goal with this is to potentially slow down or end the process of moving profits around to avoid U.S. taxes. Good luck, man.
Yeah, this is another one where they don't really say how they're going to do it.
Nope.
They're like, oh, there's a ton of tax loopholes, and we need to hold them accountable and make them pay a minimum. It's like, yeah, but how?
Yep. But that's mostly how he's going to fund this thing. He's going to tax the corporations and tax rich and wealthy people. Sounds super based, man.
But he also says, well, if you have a different idea for how you should pay for it, then let me know, because he knows.
Well, we're going to get to that, too. So, and while the plan would spend most of the one-time funding over 8 years, the corporate tax changes would then raise that estimated $2 trillion for the entire proposal over 15 years. So it's not an exact quick turnaround.
And that's also, I think that's important to note. When they say, oh, this is another $2 trillion that he wants to spend, it's not like they want to write a check today for $2 trillion for this plan. It's $2 trillion over 8 years.
Correct.
For infrastructure. That's like not hardly anything.
Right. And on top of that, it's going to, well, at least according to the plan, in theory, it's going to be paid back within 15. And even though it's not a 1-to-1 ratio, we need to remember that infrastructure is an investment. These are investments in our society, in our country, in our people. So when we have investments, you're not going to see a return right away. That's kind of the whole point of investments. But when you invest properly, you're going to see your actual profits or returns increase as time goes on. So by the time that you pay back what you initially invested, you're going to see a gigantic surplus because of all the greatness that happened because of your investments.
Right. The 15-year is just with everything staying the same.
Correct.
Not because of all these investments in American business, we're getting more in taxes back anyway. Like we hit this massive breakthrough on lithium battery technology, and now we've got, multiple companies that sprang up from that, and we're pulling in $1 trillion more in taxes because of that. So, then that would obviously pay it back a lot faster.
Right. So when your crazy conservative aunt or uncle tries to tell you about how Democrats are all about just spending and raising the deficit, note that this is just a minimal investment to better our country in the long run. That's all this is. In the grand scheme of a country, 15 years is not a long time. So it'd be just fine. But we have other people who disagree with that, so we're going to talk about that. The main Republican criticism, like I said at the beginning of the segment, is the definition of infrastructure. You may see a lot of tweets and memes from conservatives and conservative pundits mocking the idea of anything can be infrastructure because they're trying to expand what the idea of what infrastructure actually is. You even saw Senator Marsha Blackburn get a lot of flack for this online, where she said, quote, Biden's infrastructure proposal is the latest attempt to push through a liberal agenda. Take a look at what Biden wants taxpayer dollars going towards. And then she has like 3 consistent memes that she's replying to in a tweet thread with like big evil looking numbers saying $35 billion for climate change studies, $220 billion for green transportation initiatives, and $400 billion for elder care because screw the elderly. She didn't say the last part. But.
Well, they're all tied together, right? So in order to put all of our elderly on the iceberg and kick them out into the sea, we need there to actually be icebergs still. So that's why you need the money for climate change studies and green transportation.
It's all about investments, you guys. We're going to kick all the boomers out of the country. They need boats to get kicked off on. But aside from the fact that Republicans are being absolutely stupid with shallow takes on what infrastructure is.
No Republicans voted for the COVID bill anyway.
Right.
So who cares? At this point, I would be done with courting conservative.
Right, because it doesn't matter.
They've shown they don't care. They're not going to vote for anything coming from a Democratic administration. That's fine.
But in an attempt to steel man the opposing arguments, what are some of the more logical? I don't know what the best rational, maybe? Conservative arguments against this plan. Well, number one, they say it's a bad time to raise taxes on businesses. That raising taxes on American businesses will actually make American companies less competitive, which will make the nation as a whole less competitive, which will then increase outsourcing even more. Problem with that is it's already happening.
And has been happening for the past 50 years. That's why we don't manufacture anything here anymore, because all of those manufacturing jobs and facilities have left the country.
Well, it's also why the Trump tax cuts didn't just magically bring all those companies back like he said he would. So we need to actually wrangle in those companies. That's the whole point.
The idea that, it's a bad time to raise taxes on businesses because we're all struggling due to COVID, we know that's not true. We've all seen those statistics about the top companies making trillions of dollars during this time. They're not struggling. Amazon is not losing money during COVID.
Workers are struggling.
Yeah. Amazon is making more money now than they ever did. So yes, while I agree that small businesses and specifically service industry businesses are really hit hard, that's not who we're talking about raising taxes on in the first place. We're talking about raising taxes on large corporations, and they are doing just fine. And they're not giving back to the people or to the government like they're supposed to. We've said that over and over again. That's the problem. They can make trillions and trillions of dollars, even in the hardest economic times. And has the average Amazon worker's salary doubled in that time? That Jeff Bezos has become the second wealthiest man in the world? Has the salaries at the Tesla plants tripled ever since Elon Musk became the wealthiest person in the world?
I'm going to say no.
That would be correct.
Oh, good. What do I get?
They've shown they are not willing to share their profits with their workers. And they also, as we discussed a minute ago, they do everything they can to avoid paying any federal taxes. So, in order to combat that reality, the government needs to do whatever it can to try to force them to pay their fair share, because they're not going to do it willingly. They're going to keep doing things like you said, the Trump tax cuts. That did not bring manufacturing back into the United States. And it didn't do anything for the average worker. All those companies did is buy back their own stock to raise their stock prices and pay off their shareholders.
And that was it.
And that was it. That's what we lost $1 trillion, $2 trillion in tax revenue so that shareholders of all of those companies could get a bigger dividend return. Yay, what an investment in our country. So that idea that, well, these businesses, this is a tough time, we really need to, tighten our belts. We can't be. No.
It's just an excuse.
Yes. And it's a bad one, and it's demonstrably false, and we shouldn't listen to it.
So, okay, that one's bad. Let's go to the next one. Republicans are hesitant on having a gigantic stimulus bill for this type of spending. They much prefer things like gas taxes and vehicle miles traveled to pay for the infrastructure instead. Basically, a pay for the infrastructure you use type of model. Problem with that is that it drastically shrinks the pool where that cost can get spread out to. So that means people are going to pay more money for something that they may not have the means to do, which means definitely higher taxes if you're going to have something next to you built better, which we don't have the funds to do as general people. Big corporations do. They can get taxed. They can do that. They can have and eat those costs. General people who are making less than $400,000 a year can't do that. You even saw people like Mitt Romney propose things like carbon taxes as well, which again, sounds like it could potentially be a good idea, but it's just having a big spending bill will give us the best ability to spread the costs out as far as possible, making it less for everyone.
It reminds me of the states that have no state income tax.
Right.
Which that just, of course, becomes tax havens for the wealthy, and disadvantaged people that live in those areas, or even average people that live in those areas, yeah, you don't get any state income tax, but you pay higher taxes on everything you use.
Exactly.
And for the wealthy, it's much easier to get around those things and not end up paying hardly anything to the state, whereas the people that aren't able to buy everything out of state, so they don't have that same sales tax and all of the other advantages that are available to the wealthy, they end up paying the vast majority of the state's tax burden. So it's something that sounds good, kind of in a really quick, like, oh, only pay when you use stuff. That's fine. But again, when you really think about it, it's always advantageous to the rich and a burden to the average person, and especially a burden to the poor.
Well, and also to me, it just sounds like a disingenuous way to sneak in like privatization as well. If you want to do things like tollways and privately owned parking lots and buildings and things like that, that's just going to suck more money out of everything. And we even saw Biden challenge Republicans to offer their own complete solutions. He said, hey, if you want to actually solve this problem, you don't like the way I'm going to pay for these things because you don't want big corporations to be taxed because you're crazy Republicans, figure out a better way to do it. Figure out a better way to raise all this money. The only stipulation is you cannot raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year.
I can tell you what the Republican answer is going to be. Cut everything out of this bill that goes to anyone who's not a corporation, and then lower taxes on corporations, and then we will pass that bill.
But again, to show you that the parties are not the same, even if we do have a more moderate president, you literally have a president who's saying, do not tax middle class to low income people. And let's be real here, $400,000 a year is a lot of freaking money. So to say, don't tax anyone up to making $400,000 a year is pretty damn generous.
But what's the conservative spin on this? Biden's going to raise your taxes.
Which is insane because he's doing the exact opposite, and Republicans want to raise your taxes. Biden wants to raise taxes on the super rich and the big wealthy corporations who are taking advantage of our tax system. So how are the people seeing this? Well, actually, a recent NPR, PBS NewsHour, and Marist poll asked that same question. According to the poll, 56% of respondents supported the plan. So according to the poll, roads, bridges, and ports had a 96% approval rating for funding. Funding for pipes that supply drinking water had an 89%. The electric grid had an 85%. Broadband internet was kind of in the lowest, more acceptable area with 62%, which that's really freaking low. I don't know why, again.
So this is what people defined as part of infrastructure.
Right.
Correct? So 96% saw roads, bridges. Who are the 4% that don't think roads, bridges, and ports are part of infrastructure?
I don't know, man. And then long-term healthcare at 58%.
I know one of them is the governor of South Dakota, but I don't know the other three.
A narrow majority of 51% also included electric vehicles, charging stations to be a part of America's infrastructure. Where they really got divided was how you actually paid for it. About 2 in 3 Americans, or 65%, favored funding the American Jobs Plan by taxing those earning $400,000 or more annually. Democrats at 90%, independents at 66%, and the Republicans at 65% opposed paying for the plan in this manner. When it came to raising the corporate tax rate, it was a lot more partisan, where you had 80% of Democrats supporting raising the tax rate over 21%, and Republicans only at 17% at raising it over 21%.
That is ridiculous.
Oh my God. And then independents were divided at 48% to 48%. And then finally, 63% of Americans do support a tax at least 21% on the earnings of U.S. corporations in other countries. Although there is a partisan split between Democrats and Republicans, and most independents support it at 69%. So the majority of people do support this infrastructure plan overall. It's just they don't know how it's going to be paid for, and they're worried about raising taxes. That's what it is at the end of the day. So the idea comes down to messaging. We have to tell people we, as normal, everyday people, are not going to get our butts taxed off. It's going to be the corporations, and that's going to be okay.
And it's not like, oh, we're really going to stick it to the corporations.
Again, it was at 35% for a corporate tax rate before Trump. It's not even going to go up to that.
They're going to lose half of their tax cut. And also
4 years ago.
And also keep in mind that the tax cut that was part of Trump's plan that affected average people has already expired.
Yep.
So we've already lost the slight tax break that we got under Trump, but they made it so that, of course, the corporate tax cut was permanent.
Yep. So let's change that. Let's fix that. And while we're at it, let's fix our country too. So support this. Go tell your friends and family to support this. Tell your crazy...
It's not perfect.
Tell your crazy Republican aunts and uncles that they're crazy first, and then second, to support this. If they're not, they're crazy.
It's a first step. And when we get our progressive president in 3 years...
we enact communism.
That's when we start divvying up the corporations to the government.
Right. Well, that's all we got. Make sure you go support this. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
And that will not be next week. We are actually off next week.
We are taking off. Jason's going to be out of town.
Yay.
So that's that. Other than that, see you next time, guys.
Goodbye.
Thank you for listening. We hope to see you in the next episode. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at ThinkProPod. You can email us at thinkpropod@gmail.com. And remember, when in doubt, think progressively. The whole point of politics and resolving issues is to actually utilize the issue at hand to solve the freaking issue.
Said issue a lot there. I don't know if you want to redo
I'll redo it then. Fine, I'm just
like use the issue to solve the issue to
you
combat
triggered
the issue.
me. No pun intended. Where like we're Tom Cotton. All right.